somewhere also for them to begin. All right, so it looks like we have a quorum. Did we get Bob? Oh, there's Bob. Yep. Very good. Okay, well, let's go ahead and call this meeting to order then. I'll pull up my agenda here. So we have on our consent agenda the August 13, 2020 minutes. And the floor is open for a motion to pass those.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Again.
Second, Ray. All in favor?
Aye.
Just raise your hands. Great. All right, moving past that. The next meeting will be at our regularly scheduled time of October 8th. And then we have an announcement around the commission membership change and open positions. And so Les has resigned her position on our commission due to some family needs. And so we do have her position open. And we also still have the SOU position and a high school position. And I had a young person, a teenager at Ashland High School, reach out to me about the high school position last spring. And so I'm going to follow back up and see if they're interested in putting their application forward. And then I've also reached out to some folks at SOU. I don't know, I'm not expecting a lot to happen in the near term with SOU, just given everything that's going on in the world. But then that does leave us with one other position. So we should be thinking about how we might fill that. Stu, you've got a staff update for us?
I do, but before I give that, I just would like to see, is there anybody who can volunteer to keep track of action items? Because we don't have Elizabeth today. We are recording this, but it might be useful to be able to give her something to edit. Is anybody willing to do that?
I can do it.
Okay, thank you, Ray. The other thing is our agenda doesn't have times on it, but if it seems like we're dragging, just flag real big and we'll try to keep through because there's a lot on here. Yes, so staff update. Let me open this real quick. So I went ahead and talked to a variety of the different staff heads and project leads to try to figure out what major planning processes were underway or scheduled for future projects. And attached on my memo here, I'm not going to go through every word because I think everybody's probably read it, but the big ones I think are worth pointing out. The water master plan is just about to be finished. And let's see, or is finished, I guess. Ray, you probably are more up to date on that. We're looking at having the TSP resume in 2021, which I think we've mentioned before, but that's a really big opportunity for this commission. There's a couple of other ones, the airport, the TAP, stormwater collection. These are in process with Public Works. Eventually, Parks and Rec will be putting forth a pool master plan. And Parks and Rec has its own board that does decision-making around that. So it's a little bit different than council, but I think the council will be involved also, as I understand it. So the pool is, a significant facilities project. I've already had some conversations with Parks and Rec about what that project might look like and how we can look at defossilizing it, things like that. So we have that to look forward to. Currently, there are no comp plan elements scheduled on the calendar, but I know that Community Development Office has a lot of other state mandates that they need to meet in the next 18 months or so with implementing new code provisions and whatnot. So it's not as if their calendar is just empty, but they don't currently have any comp plan elements scheduled. There is this housing needs analysis on the calendar, which Bill Molnar provided a little explanation here about that, which is a technical document that is attached to the comp plan. So it'd be interesting to review that and participate if possible. Let's see, other action items here. And I know when I put this memo together, some of these were joint items I had with Ray and Bob and Jeff, but for my part, Bob and I did connect a little bit to flesh out his list. I'll let him talk about that. Ray and I think, need to double back maybe after this meeting and talk about other planning processes and what we want to do there in the future. Let's see, we have invited Tom. He's here today. Hello, Tom, to talk about the electric utility. I have to double check with Adam, but I believe we have a Vista on tap for the next meeting. I'm actually going to be out of town that meeting, so I won't be there, but I believe Adam will be here in my place. So hopefully that will be a really good meeting. Jeff has a lot of updates to offer on the EO, so I will skip that piece. Let's see here. Oh, I did. So probably the most exciting thing on here, I don't know why I put it at the end. I did talk to finance about the potential for expanding our on-bill finance mechanism. They believe that that's totally doable. And I wouldn't say they were enthusiastic, because I know all city staff are like working at the max, but they're open to it, and they really like that program, and they want to be an agent of change. So that was really great to hear that. I know we're having a new finance director soon, and I have no idea where she would fit into the development of this, but I definitely want to engage them around that as soon as possible. So that's good. I think that on-bill financing is a really good area that this group could work to expand our presence and do some good in the community. Other things I wanted to just pass along. Transportation Commission did make a motion on how the city should consider spending clean fuels credits. I listed that in the memo here. Basically, they would like us to reinvest them in such a way that we can create more clean fuel credits, which I think is in line with a lot of the ideas we've discussed already. Also, I just threw some other useful references in here, which you can take or leave as you like. But there's this a visual reference for understanding project terms. I find this very useful because there's a lot of jargon in project management, and there's a lot of jargon in our climate plan. And it's not always clear what's the difference between a goal and a strategy and an action and a tactic. And it's like, there's no reason it needs to be so complicated. But in an effort to help decipher what we have, I wanted to give you this nice little infographic, which is at the end of my report here. And as well, there's a nice template for project scoping if anyone feels inspired to look at that. That is all I have. Thank you.
A couple things, Stu, I'd just like to add on to that. One is a question around the clean fuels. When do you think that's going to be coming back to council? Because I think it would be useful for the council to have some sort of guidance from this commission on that as well.
I don't know. We're still trying to monetize the credits. I think that could happen pretty soon. There's been a lot of delays with COVID and the fires and whatnot, but I think it's going to happen soon. Once we have the cash, then we'll have to do a budget amendment for it, as I understand it. So prior to that would be good, but not until we know what we have to work with, I think. I mean, it would be totally appropriate to pass a generic motion like Transportation Commission did in advance of knowing what exactly we're going to do. But if it were too detailed, I might want to have a little breakout group with, or have some discussion about the language, or you could just use the one Transportation Commission did. I mean, that was fine.
Yeah. Well, I'm just wondering, when it comes out, that's when it'll show up as in a budget amendment. We have time. I just wanted to clarify the timing. So when you finally get that number, you don't have to bring it to council right away because you're not spending it yet. So we can sit on it. I just want to make sure that my understanding of the timing is right, because I just don't want us to be chasing this. There are some concerns just because it would be general fund money if it wasn't reinvested, and our general fund is what we're working on right now because of the shortfalls, which are shifting right now because every hotel room in Ashland is now full. So those numbers are going to be all over the place and hard to predict. A couple of, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, the good news, if we, when we reinvest these to create more clean fuel credits, that also benefits the general fund
Yeah.
via the electric tax. So, we can put it direct in the general fund technically, or we can invest it and still benefit the general fund. It's just a little more of a delay.
Right.
So,
And I think, yeah, the intensity of our current financial situation may encourage people to look more short-term than long-term. So I think it will be important that this commission really has something to say about this when it's time. So it's fine if we leave it off the schedules until we know more about the timing. A couple of other things, when we talk about the comprehensive plan and what's up for the next year for planning, one of the things is that we need to do as a council, and I don't have a whole lot of confidence that we're going to get much of that done this year, but next year, as much as a couple of us can push it, we are going to be digging into much more deep financial or strategic planning. And that's when this question of the comprehensive plan could come up. That's when I would expect to see if we want that to be a higher level goal, more directive, for where in the comprehensive plan do we think is the next most important thing for climate.
Sure.
I think there'll be a place to enter into there. And then the airport plan, they brought that in front of us at the beginning of September, and we approved it. And there's always been talk about maybe a solar array out at the airport. And they have set up a master plan with a certain amount of space on that airport lands that is sort of undesignated and could be used for renewable energy. And when they came in front of the council just a little bit ago with their annual reports, they also said that they're ready to get started figuring out solar out at the airport. And so that might be something, obviously I think our commission is the one that know it would be a likely intersect with that. I don't know that they feel like they have the expertise on their commission to really jump into it, but they seem to be fully ready to have that conversation, and their chair spoke to it specifically when she was in front of us. So just a heads up, I don't know where that might fit, but we do know that we have, the larger element within Bonneville, the larger installation, we still haven't used it. And so somewhere in here, we should try to figure that out. And then that's all that I had. Thank you.
Sure. One other little piece that I should add, or two things, I guess. I forwarded you just today some information about water curtailment that the Public Works asked to be distributed to all the commissions. You can read that as you're able. And the other thing is that our electric vehicle public charging is nearly complete. So by the next time we meet, hopefully it'll be online and doing its thing. So, okay, a couple quick questions and then we carry on. Gary, Ray?
Yeah, I had a question of you. One was, what's the status of the heat pump water heater replacement program, and when might that be actually initiated? I know that it was planned to start this summer, but has been postponed. And then the second question is whether you can procure for the commission, or at least me, a graphic showing the distribution of, or the consumption by water users, because it would appear, based upon what Ray and I myself have observed with our water meter information, that the cutoff for level 1 curtailment is far beyond anything most households consume. And I wonder how many customers are actually impacted and who those might be. Can you find that out?
Yeah, I can find out. I'll have to just email our water person and ask, but yeah, I think that's doable. And as for the water heater, I'll have to check with the program guys, because I'm not in the know about what their summer planning is. So maybe you and I can connect after this meeting and talk about it.
Okay.
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 And Ray and then Bob?
Can I jump in real quickly? I have a little bit of information on the curtailment.
Sure.
it is really designed to go after initially the people who are using the most water, the residential users who are using the most. And so, because we had that question come up at the council of lots of people have extra people in their homes right now, and is that going to be a problem? And it's most people are not going to run into those problems now, but that when staff came in front of council, they said that they thought that curtailment level 1 with the rest of Ashland doing their voluntary work that we do so well, they thought that could handle it if we jumped on it. So it's a little bit, it's not actually going to impact a lot of the people who have water meters because we don't use that much water.
Precisely.
Okay, Ray?
Okay, Stu, I had sent you an email on this, going back to your list. I think we need to add the water management and conservation plan to the list. And talking with Scott, he thought that was going to get updated in 2023. And we're looking to have that contain our climate update modeling as well. So I think it'd be good just to make sure it's on the list.
Okay.
And then we need to figure out where our electric utility is going to be, whether we're going to end up with a standalone or keep it in the comprehensive plan. Because right now we only have an electric utility study that was done that really just looked at capacity. So we don't have a master plan for electric utility. Maybe Tom, you can comment on that. If it should stay in the comp plan, or are we thinking we would have to develop one?
Yeah, that's a pretty big topic. I think let's probably not try to solve it right here, but it's a good question. I think that there's some idea that the comp plan is a really good house for the, longer term planning for the utility, but we need to get with the community development folks that are gatekeepers of the comprehensive plan and figure out what process we're going to use and what makes sense to put in which area. I know Tom can speak to this more now or later, but I know we have some other elements that would be part of the future strategic plan or master plan, sorry, like the rate design study and the infrastructure plan. But there also could be some other strategic stuff in there, and all mashed together would make a nice electric master plan. And Tom, jump in if you have something to add, but I think that once we get an official project underway to sort of look at the utility plan, then we'll have to find out what's the best vessel for it. But yeah, I'm hoping that the comp plan is the thing, because that seems like it worked well in talent. And I think it's the best way to give durable direction to staff and council, for that matter. So did I answer your question? I'm not sure if I did.
No, I think just raising awareness, and I think the comp plan is fine with me as well, because, rather than, there could be 5 other things you might have to pull out. So it'd be easier just to keep it all in there. Mm-hmm. And maybe we just delineate a little bit more, electrical's in there, so.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks, Ray. Bob, real quick, and then we can move on.
Yeah, just 2 comments. One is on the pool, and you mentioned it. Obviously, this is talking about the pool master plan. I don't know. I think more urgent than a pool master plan is actually the architectural design for a new pool when we actually decide to go forward with that, because the pool is one of the largest consumers of natural gas of city operations. So you mentioned that, and clearly we want to make sure that we get in on that even before a master plan if necessary. And the second thing is just a comment on-bill financing. Many organizations or many entities that do that sort of thing have a way of allocating costs. This should be cost neutral to the city. So whatever program asks the city to use its billing service would actually pay for that, so that it could be, we wouldn't be asking the city to do that. And that could be something that could be more generally applicable in other, for other programs and departments.
Yeah.
That should take some of the sting out of city, any city resistance to doing it, because they shouldn't be asking for free.
Gets a little messy because the city is the utility, so it's like, but we'll figure it out. I think that's a good comment. We don't want to be putting a burden on anybody more than necessary. And with regards to the pool, I had talked to Parks a couple times about it, and I know that they are asking their designers for at least an electric option, including as part of their design package. So they'll have that as a consideration, and hopefully we'll get to keep working on that topic with them. Well, we can invite them to come here and talk about it too.
Yeah, I think it should be more than an option. If we're talking about, electrifying Ashland,
Right.
adding, committed emissions for the next several decades with a gas-heated swimming pool would be, really a disaster.
Yeah.
I hate to use the word disaster in current context, but that would be a step backward.
Yeah, I agree. There's a number of facilities upgrades that are going to have to choose, and those are all going to probably end up in council eventually. And I think that I think we all know what choice we want to make there, and so we'll be stridently advocating for the carbon-friendly option.
Yeah.
Chris, did you have a quick?
Just to dovetail on with the pool discussion, I actually spoke with, I think, the Aquatic Design Group this morning. I think they're working on that project. And I think another conversation to have in that regard is the chlorinization versus salinization and, chemical storage. Again, regenerative media filter, utilizing, I think, technologies in that pool that can help progress the standard on a number of levels that, may not be, maybe they're more qualitative than quantitative, but they still, I think, have an impact on climate and general health in local environment.
I think that's a great distinction to make. And it's too bad Julian's not here because I know he's on the APRC board. So it'd be good to spread that knowledge around.
So is there an action item here to have in a future meeting, have the pool group come talk to us or not?
It's up to you folks.
I think probably yes, but it's probably a little bit of a ways out because their funding mechanism blew up with COVID. And so the council had passed the ability to do a revenue bond for that pool. And when we've had that conversation, I expressed the need to be looking at something besides natural gas or, besides that for the heating element. And they had indicated that they were, very on board with that. And then the council is supposed to see the next set of plans. That's one of the questions I asked was are we going to see more of this information? And they said yes. So I'm expecting it to come in front of council, and there's probably a time when it will be ripe for this commission to talk to Parks about that. And with that revenue bond set aside, I don't know if the permission still holds given the kind of delay that it's going to have. So I don't know if they're going to come back to us again in terms of the financing or if they're just coming back in terms of the design. But I think there will be a time when that conversation is ripe. And maybe it's now, just given that we want to get out ahead of it and we're trying to get out ahead of it.
I think it's probably good to put the invite out sooner rather than later, knowing how long it takes to schedule things. And if it's pre-crunch time, maybe that's a good time to touch base with them.
Yeah.
Okay, I got it.
Yeah, that sounds good. And just so you all know, Parks has we're in our EOC right now with the fires, and they have the head of Parks has housing and human services functions right now in the emergency. So I think it's fine to get it in, but we should expect a pretty significant delay. Okay, any other announcements from commissioners? All right, and I don't think we had anything from any fellow commissions. That's correct. All right, and then no public forum as well, unless you've received something, Stu, that I haven't seen. All right, well, now we are at the time for Tom Bartlett. Thank you for joining us today, Tom. We've been looking forward to having you here and being able to have this conversation. Stu, maybe I'll hand it over to you, given that you issued the invitation, so you can line us up.
Yeah. Tom, I'll put your presentation on my screen, and you can just let me know when to click through if that works for you.
That's fine, yeah. Just to kind of set the stage, I guess, I just put a couple of 5 or 6 slides together of just some basic stuff because I didn't really know what you guys were looking for. And so I figured just some background overview type of stuff, and then I'm wide open for questions. One thing I was going to add real quick, just to dovetail with your previous conversation about the pool, one of their design folks did contact me a week or 2 ago, just asking questions about electric rates and stuff. So for whatever that's worth.
Can you folks see the slides?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, Tom,
All
take
right.
it away.
All right, we can go to the next one. I think we all know what. So this is just kind of our overview. We've got close to 13,000 meters. We're a full requirements BPA customer. We are a top in per capita for solar installations, consumer-owned solar. We have our own little hydro generator, and we do it all with about 17 people. Go ahead, Stu.
Can you say a quick word, Tom, about what full requirements means?
Well, it's the type of contract we have. It basically, we guarantee that we will buy all the power we're going to sell from BPA unless we designated it in the contract, such as like our little hydro generator. If it was a resource we had, we could designate it. Otherwise, if we're going to sell it, we're going to buy it from them, and therefore we get preference and a lot of other things that so BPA gets their security on the other side. And I put this together just to kind of show where we are and how good our conservation and solar has had an effect. We keep growing and building and growing and building, and yet you can see a fairly steady decline in our annual usage. I noticed the even year pattern of decreases, and I just decided personally that that must be due to federal elections and everybody turns their TV off, was my guess. Go ahead, Stu. This is the same information, just in Excel form. I know sometimes it's easier for me to see that way, and it kind of give you, and I've got the highest month in the data set is 20 million kilowatt hours, and the lowest at 11, almost 12 million, and our average is around 14 million, and our growth over that same time frame is a negative, which is, you know, I guess worth calling out considering the number of buildings we've seen go in that amount of time.
Tom, I was a little confused about your numbers, the kilowatt hours. So like in 2012, you're 177
177
million kilowatt hours.
653,000.
Million kilowatt hours.
Yes.
Okay.
That's what we purchased from BPA and what we generated at our hydro plant. Go ahead, Stu. So this is the most recent data I have from BPA on their system mix and where that electricity actually is generated from. That 5% unspecified is market purchases that BPA has to go to the market and purchase at like Mid-Columbia Trading Center for, you know, the highs and lows to kind of fill in the gaps in when the federal system's producing and when it's needed. And so those purchases can't be resource specific. You just buy. And so they're assigned a baseline carbon number that just kind of an average number. But the rest of it, you can see, is pretty clean.
I have a quick question for you, Tom, on that last slide. So we get this question a lot. People say, well, Ashland's power is already clean, so why should we focus on solar and renewable energies and all that sort of thing? But it's my understanding that if we don't buy it, they can sell it to someone else. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And then any sort of population increase in the Pacific Northwest also would be potentially pulling from this energy source, correct?
Yeah, I mean, and it's not that there's not extra at the current time. A lot of, well, and that's why BPA is studying pretty close right now how to become part of that energy imbalance market in California to sell into that, because they do have excess generation a lot of times.
And so they could sell all the way down into California.
They have been, actually.
They have been.
Yeah, and they what they've been doing until just recently, some legislation passed, they couldn't buy the California carbon credits or the carbon licenses or whatever you want to call them, because it's considered a tax, and they're a federal agency, they couldn't pay a state tax. So they were having to kind of sleeve it through another utility, which made it kind of interesting and less lucrative, but they were doing it. And now they're working on the infrastructure and the grid modernization stuff they need to play in that real-time market.
So any electrons that we don't need to pull into Ashland as they go sailing past towards California can go towards replacing energy that is much more frequently fossil fuel driven in California. Is that correct? Is that a correct assumption?
In theory, yeah. I mean, there's some transmission constraints that are an issue right now that are being worked on and looked at pretty hard, but.
Okay, thank you.
This electricity mix is different from Oregon's as a whole. PG&E, for example, has a coal-fired power plant in Boardman, which is going to be shut down later this year. But Oregon as a whole does import electricity from coal-fired plants. So, you know, Ashland's, we're very, very clean, but the state of as a whole doesn't look this good.
Yeah, but I think we need to be careful about looking at history as a predictor of the future. The energy system is in a major transition right now, and it is becoming more and more true that the renewables are cheaper than anything else, and so they actually get scheduled first. So I think it's best not to get hung up on this, and when people bring this up, we need to caution them that it's not obviously true anymore, and it will become less and less true as time goes on.
And another piece to that, I don't know if any of you have seen Pacific Power's recent IPR, but they have highly accelerated most of their coal retirements, and enough that the Pacific Northwest took a step back and is doing a new resource adequacy study because of those accelerated retirements.
Right, and so I think from an Ashland point of view, it's not so much trying to do our bit in cleaning up the power supply. What we need to be thinking about the most is resiliency.
Well, and also getting more people to use the electric versus fossil.
Absolutely.
Right.
Well, you're right, to displace direct use of natural gas.
Yeah.
So on that same thread, here's some data that's I thought was kind of telling as to how we compare emissions wise with BPA power versus the Northwest or the nation. Well, it's not perfect. It's definitely something to be proud of.
Yeah, I assume they're not amortizing the building of the dam in this number.
I would imagine not.
There's maybe one little tidbit I would add on here, which is that when Ashland does our greenhouse gas inventories, at least all the ones we've done to date, those are all compliant with the international protocol. And what that does to our carbon is that on our greenhouse gas inventory, we have to average all these numbers together. And so we actually report emissions that are higher than this because that's the protocol, and they do that to avoid double counting. But it creates this duality of like how we measure versus how we purchase. So I just wanted to call that out. It's a kind of a rabbit hole, but worth knowing.
Okay. And that's all I put together, just kind of to prime the conversation, really.
Tom, can you comment on, I mean, one of the things we've been talking about here, and I know Rick's pretty focused on this, is the whole BPA contract and how things might change, especially if we want to produce more energy here in Ashland with solar.
And I've had a lot of conversations with our account executives and also working with really close with NRU, who does a lot of the, will do a lot of the smoky room kind of negotiating, pencil and paper with some experts that really do study the way these things are calculated. And one of the things that seems to ring true for most all the utilities that are members of NRU is having some more ability to do those kind of things, more off-ramps, more openings to changes in the contract, not so stringent, so long. So I would anticipate that that is something that will stay with the whole negotiation process.
When does Ashland really have to put forward its proposal or what it's looking for?
What was that again?
When does Ashland actually have to put forward to BPA our proposal or what we're looking for?
Well, that's what I said. I've had those conversations with our account executive about several of the things that we're looking for. They're looking to be, right now they're working on the BP22 rate case, which is the next 2 years. As soon as that is finished is when they're going to start into the heavy lifting part of the post 2028 contracts. And we'll have a better opportunities at that point. But I've had several one-on-one conversations with our account execs, with their bosses, and NRU is they're working on our behalf daily. And
okay,
so I've answered those questions to them as well.
Right. So I have a question, and Tom, Rick and I met with Tom several months ago before COVID. And had a,
seems like a lifetime ago.
It seems like a life. It does. And one of the things that is it would be helpful, I think, for this commission to hear is just a little bit more detail about this utility master plan process that we thought initially was going to start in the spring until COVID hit. And so if you could tell us a little bit more about that process and then how that process does or doesn't influence or relate to the Bonneville contract, that would be really helpful.
Well, as far as the process is right now, I actually have submitted, I think, the entire data request for update on our rate study and make sure we're meeting our needs there as far as covering our costs and capital investment and stuff. So that was going to be the kind of launch piece to then get with our engineering group and see whether either they wanted to recommend we go to somebody else or if it's something they can do because they do just about everything, and do more of a master planning type of document that incorporates that rate trajectory. As far as how that would play into the BPA contract, it could play in as if we were, say, going to upsize our hydro generator or put a large solar facility in that master plan. That, of course, those are going to be defined resources in the next contract and going to shape, what our piece of the pie is.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems to me that defined resources question is a really important one. And so we have a certain amount of time. Whatever we really want to do on renewable energy, we want to get it done in a timing such that it is considered one of those resources.
They could be defined in the contract, I believe, even in these contracts that we currently have. Even if it was just planned, you could have defined it at the beginning of the contract.
So you don't have to have it built. It doesn't have to be in place in order to be considered defined.
I don't believe so. And like I said, I'm pretty sure that we're not the only ones that wish they could have had some more flexibility in these current contracts. So I would imagine any future contracts will have, or there'll be a lot of revolt, and BPA doesn't want that.
Tom, do you envision any supplier capacity shortfalls, either short-term or in the future long-term, if we are successful in shifting more toward electric, anything like the blackouts, rolling blackouts, or any constraints that you foresee for a city our size?
Not currently, but there is some regional concern in that, and the Northwest Power Pool has actually stood up a resource adequacy program, and they're working with the Southwest Power Pool to help them design it. And the big players in the region are kind of coming together to back each other up to make sure that, you know, one person's extra capacity that they have to have for load could be shifted to another supplier if need be, so that they're not all having to hold their own reserves, and kind of helping each other out to avoid exactly those problems, especially with the coal retirements coming as quickly as they are.
Mm-hmm.
Tom, I wonder if you could say a few words about the transmission system, and because it's my understanding is it's not BPA that actually does the transmission; it's somebody else that does the transmission. Is that right?
It's a lot of somebody's. BPA has a huge transmission footprint in the Northwest. I think, I don't even know if it's on the sheet, but it's 15,000 miles that BPA owns. SODA, PacifiCorp obviously owns a lot, Idaho Power, Portland General, and instead of each of them building transmission to their customers, they years ago have put in place contracts to use each, you know, of course there's costs and everything, but the contracts are pretty legacy, to wheel across each other's transmission system to feed customers. PacifiCorp wheels a lot across BPA's system into Idaho, and BPA wheels across PacifiCorp to us.
So one of the things that this commission, oh, go ahead, Rick.
Well, Tom, we spoke briefly about microgrids and how our own local distribution grid might evolve. And I'm wondering if you could share your thoughts about that with the whole commission.
There's a lot of options there, and the more robust of a microgrid you want, the more expensive it gets really quick. It takes a lot of pretty sophisticated equipment to switch and island that kind of stuff and make sure your resources match your loads. There's some new battery technology that I've actually just recently been setting through some webinars and getting some info on that could be really useful, especially for a lot of our solar customers. And it's something I wanted to, as I learned some more on it, I want to get Stu pulled in and maybe on the on-bill finance type of thing for some of those solar customers that would be really useful for their resiliency and even individual islanding, but some of our city facilities as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that there's a lot of interest in particularly the water systems and seeing what kind of resilient, sort of redundant, resilient energy systems can be brought in specifically around those, maybe the hospital, the airport, those kind of places where if we did lose all of our electrical system, our standard electrical system, the EOC, those kind of places. And that may be where we start with some of these bigger installations. One of the things that we've been talking about in one of our goals, we've been refining our goals post-COVID or since COVID at least. And we're not quite post-COVID yet, but around just electrifying Ashland, a big push to get people to switch fossil fuels to electricity, and at the same time continuing to do that conservation so that we're tightening houses. And so, you know, it's interesting that we're seeing what we want, which is a lower use of energy over time. But what we actually are putting in process right now is going to lift that energy use up, that electrical energy use up locally. You know, again, while we still put conservation in process. In your master planning process, would it be possible for us to look at, you know, what would the electric system need to be able to do if everybody in Ashland was basically only using electricity? And obviously, we don't know how long it would take to get to that sort of a point. But, you know, when you're looking at that master planning space, I assume that the assumption is that we're going to sort of carry on with similar use of fossil fuels versus electricity. But, you know, we're as a community and as a commission and as a city, we've kind of put a stake in the ground around this fuel switching. So is it possible for us to create a master plan that would say, this is how we intend to meet that electrical demand as it's growing, as people are switching with renewable energy, local renewable energy?
And absolutely, and that's one of the reasons why I look so strongly towards ONS, because they've modeled our system. It's in a modeling program. You can add, I want to put this much load at this point in this line, and it'll light up red on the piece that needs upgraded. It's really great stuff. So yeah, absolutely, it can be modeled for, you know, zero natural gas to all natural gas, and it'll tell you where the weak spots are or what you need to do to make your system do that.
And what about not just the fixed infrastructure, but also chargers for electric vehicles, which then also are mobile batteries?
Yeah, and that's getting into the more sophisticated metering, communications type of stuff that I'll let y'all bring it out to council. I'm not going to take those arrows just yet.
Rick's
There's
good
a
at
lot of
that.
interesting
I'm fine with
things.
that, as long as you're good with it.
There's a lot of interesting things happening at
radio
the thing.
meters.
Yeah, anyway.
Oh, go ahead, Stu.
I was just going to say, I think there's a lot of interesting technological developments happening at all different levels of the grid right now. And Ashland is a really awesome place to pilot things because we have such a compact utility territory. What we need is ample funding to make these things happen, because there's not a lot of gravy in the city budget to try new things so far.
Right.
Yeah, well, I assume you're not talking about implementation money, because that's many millions of dollars. Right now, what we're really needing is planning money.
Yeah.
Okay.
Planning
Yeah.
and piloting, perhaps.
And modeling.
Right, and this all, because it's an enterprise fund, it's different. You know, we don't, the electric utility doesn't have to you know, deal with a lot of the problems that we see within the larger city budget. You know, they don't end up in the conversation around, you know, how are we going to balance the city budget? Typically it's rate driven. It has to pay its own way. It also means nobody can take its money because it's regulated in a different way. But it would seem to me that if, well, first of all, it's my understanding that we have the money in the budget for this master plan. Is that correct? Or does that have to be put in?
Yeah, no, I've got money in the budget for ONS studies.
Mm-hmm. And then at whatever point we have a master plan, then the idea would be that you sort of back into the rates, right? So you end up with capital improvement projects as part of that master plan, and that becomes part of the rate discussion. And so if we can get to a master plan that works, that is really aligned with our SEEP targets and goals, then as we're implementing it and as the rate adjustments are happening, you know, up and, you know, mostly up probably, as those are happening over time, it should be able to fund and cover what we need to cover in our electric utility system, right?
Right, and that's why we bring in people like Utility Financials to look at it and make sure that we're not going to fall behind on that and that we're meeting those, because that's their business. They make sure you're covering your costs with your rates. And I don't know if you've noticed, we've over the last few rate cases, our increases in the kilowatt hour price has been pretty de minimis, where most of the increase has been in the base fee. And what our goal there is to cover our fixed costs with the base fee. So that way we can be pretty neutral on solar, conservation, anything else, because we're going to keep the lights on and the trucks running with the base fee. That's kind of,
you don't have to sell a whole bunch of electricity just to make sure that you're covering your infrastructure.
Yeah, we don't have to be dependent on the weather to cover the bills.
Good.
Okay,
So
well,
other
the main thing that I'm still a little befuddled by is how we're going to move forward on engaging with the citizenry. In the places that I've seen, like in Vermont, that they've done really well in providing, keeping the lights on all the time, as well as addressing greenhouse gas issues. It's not done through sort of the normal rate case type stuff that I think you're referring to, Tom. Instead, there's actually an outreach to people and asking them what kind of electric service they want, how much they're willing to pay for resiliency, whether greenhouse gas goals matter to them, that sort of thing. And so I'm still a little confused as to how we're going to start addressing the top-down planning rather than the bottom-up.
Well, I guess that's something I'll probably need to get some assistance on, because I stay busy enough day to day keeping these crews going that I can get the studies pushed through, and I can work on some of that kind of stuff, and of course bring it to you folks to help understand. But I guess that's where Stu and I'm sure some of you guys' expertise would come into play.
Okay, well, so that's what I'm really trying to understand. If CPC were to take the lead on that sort of planning, would that be something that you would respond positively to? Would that help you, or is that just going to, be a problem for you?
Well, no, I think it would help. I think it just needs to be coordinated, like, have the plan in place, then start the outreach, instead of start the outreach and then all of a sudden the plan doesn't quite match what we said, so we're doing it twice.
Right, got it.
Yeah. And so you said that you would put out the call for the data. So do you have an estimate on when this master planning will really get underway?
The data has been delivered as far as for the rate study or update, I guess. Brendan and I sent a bunch of that stuff to him last week or week before. So I'm just, with fires and everything, I just haven't followed up with Dawn to see where she's at, but we'll get there.
So yeah, we're just thinking in terms of our commission and our work plan and our bandwidth and that sort of thing. We know that this has been a big interest of this commission. It's right at the top of our list of what we want to see happen, and we want to make sure that we're able to give this the energy and attention that it needs. And so I'm just wondering if you're anticipating anything really moving on this before the end of this year. I mean, should we be planning on engaging with you in the winter, or is it sooner than that, or what are we looking at?
A lot of that's going to depend on how much bandwidth ONS can commit to it. And when I know that, I will definitely let Stu or one of you know kind of what they're looking at on how best to attack it efficiently.
Okay, that sounds great. Yeah, it's a big interest for us, and what we want to avoid is doing all this electrification work and making sure that new buildings are electrified and all of that, only to find out that we didn't plan our electric system to be able to handle it.
And I can just, in a general sense, our backbone system, our main feeder system, is probably overbuilt by at least twice what we currently need. So we're in good shape as far as that goes. And everything we build new at this point, we overbuild 2 to 3 times what, other than transformer sizing, but wire sizing and stuff, we really are overbuilding.
Good. That's
Great.
strange to say. It's good that we're overbuilding, but that's where we definitely want to make sure we have the capacity given what we're trying to do.
No, those are long-term infrastructure investments, and there's no reason not to do it that way.
Yeah, exactly. Other questions for Tom?
This is really just a comment, Tom, on your department. At the start of COVID last March and April, I lost the neutral on my pole. And so after frying several things in my house, I was really happy with the city of Ashland's response. They came right out, found the problem. They had to come back several times, but they ran new wire, dug up stuff. So I was really happy. You sure you only have 17 people?
That's including myself.
He's only got 16.
I think if I just jump in for one quick second, I think that's a good point of, that Tom has a really small crew. And historically, we've kept the lights on and the poles up and delivered the power. But if we want to start looking at other things like huge solar fields, things like that, there's definitely going to need to be an increase in capacity for his team.
Yeah.
And so that's maybe a cost we might not think about first, but we would need to grow that electric department for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I presume.
Yeah. Well, and I would expect that it would if we're actually putting more load onto it, that then the resources would be there to have additional people, right? I mean, and you'd have more, and we're growing with hookups and all that sort of thing.
Well, I just want to be sure I understand. That kind of expansion would be rate-based, so it's not a city budget issue?
Yeah, it sets off to the side. I mean, it's all still part of the budget writ large, but it's as an enterprise fund, it's kind of got a financial firewall between it and the rest of the city.
Right. Well, including staff costs is what I'm saying.
Yeah, so staff costs stay within that place. So if the utility grows, then it has that revenue, that increased revenue, to then buy additional staff people.
Yeah.
Both the revenue and the authority.
Yeah, as far as I know, Tom would have a better answer for that, but there seems to be a little bit of autonomy there.
So
for you
just
to
to
grow
make
what you need.
just to make sure I understand. So the electric department would not have to ask council authority, through the budget or any other channel to hire additional staff if the electric department found that it needed more staff and had the revenue to finance it. Is that correct?
I believe we'd bring that to council to add FTEs to our budget, just like we do when we add anything else to our budget. Whether or not we have to by state law, I don't know, but it's the way we operate.
Yeah, and I think that that's the main question. I haven't seen council be up to this point really interested in telling the water system or the electric system what they do and don't need. The question is always, what is the impact on the general fund? And when the answer is none, there's it's like, okay, if that's what you need, go do it if you can pay for it without burdening the city. So I think that it's a strong relationship there, and we haven't seen, because the general fund can't use that money for anything else. You can't pull it from the water system or the electric system. It's not allowed in local government finance, and so it doesn't help the council to say no unless they think for some reason that they can reduce rates with saying no. But then they have to get into a technical debate over why the electric department or the water department doesn't actually need those people, and they would lose that debate. So I'm not too worried about that. Okay, you're on mute again, Bob. There you
Yeah, I just wondered if I could ask just one more question. So Tom, there's a lot of interest. We've talked about electrifying Ashland. There's a lot of interest in local generation through solar. We've talked about that. As I understand it, we can through the BPA. We have to buy everything, but there are a couple of loopholes or a couple of exceptions. One is what Tanya mentioned, which is one megawatt system, and the other is as many 200 kilowatt systems as we want, as long as they're independently owned and managed. Is that correct? And if it's correct, is there any negative implication for the electricity department of doing 50 of those?
Well, it is correct. The definition I was given from BPA is that they have to be electrically separate. So, and the negative part would, well, first off would be space. Land and space in Ashland is a premium. And the other negative piece of that is lost sales, because we don't, unless we owned it, we don't sell it, so we don't revenue from it. But
we're talking about, you told us that there was 174,000 megawatts. We're talking about maximum, if we really stretch it, 5 megawatts.
No, where I was going with that is like the 1 megawatt system, if that was city owned, like at the airport, as Tanya was talking about, we'd still be selling that. I mean, probably at a reduced revenue, but we would still be selling that generation. Because
the city would potentially, if the city installed it, the city would own it, right? But if we'd used like an ESCO or something else, then that would be
like the community
solar.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that comes in with the net metering piece, kind of comes in and washes out, right? And we buy it and sell it sort of inside our system, right? Like if I put solar panels up on my roof and I have more than I need, it goes back out into the system, right?
Right. And we actually pay you for that.
Right. And so in that case, there's sort of, it's an inside the system swap, right? A purchase and sell, whereas most of the energy we have we're purchasing from the outside.
Right.
Is that right?
And then you're not buying what you use because obviously you've produced more than you needed. So
I've taken my electric load off of your revenue system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Chris?
But
oh, go ahead, Bob, if you had a back.
Just to follow up on this, I'm sorry. Because I think this is an important line of conversation to follow through. I mean, it is a swap, but in fact, it's profit negative, or it's not quite profits, but there is a cost to the electric system to the extent that it's basically charging retail and selling retail, rather than charging wholesale and selling retail, and therefore using the difference to cover its operation. So it's missing that. If that, and your initial reaction was absolutely right. If there were a lot of it, then it would be a problem. If it's still pretty de minimis, and we're talking about less than 0.1% in the kinds of scales that even if we're ambitious and getting quite a few megawatts, we're not going to get anywhere close to even 1,000 megawatts. That would still be only 0.5% of what Ashland is using.
Can I break in here, because I want to be sure that we're all on the same page about the difference between energy and power. The 170 number that Tom was using was kilowatt hours, so that's energy. But then when we talk about the nameplate capacity of these solar systems, that's power. It's kilowatts. So let's not confuse the two of them. And although it would be useful to continue this conversation, I think it would become part of this sort of top-down planning thing that I was referring to. And it's a very long and complicated conversation to have.
I think it may be useful just to wrap it up by saying that, yeah, we have a little bit of leeway to do a 1 megawatt right now. It seems like there are some potential future pathways for doing more than that, especially down the road. and we have some freedom at this moment to do a number of 199 kilowatt systems within the city. And that, and Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, but only the utility can sell energy, right? So there will be no, big vendors coming to town and selling direct to customers. But we could, as a utility, have a power purchase agreement with a large solar farm and then integrate that into our mix.
Right. Post 2028, yeah.
Right.
Well, and we could decide to change that. There's no state law that requires us to not wheel power across the distribution grid. We'd have to charge for it, but that's technically possible to do. We just, in the regulatory environment and the current economic environment that we run this utility in, we don't do that.
And my comment here, I think, is in regards to the sort of solar co-op installations that you've been seeing across town. And Tom, I'm just curious how those work exactly. Obviously the one at Science Works, and then more recently we've been looking at some of that interface in other capacities. And just I'm curious from the city perspective, how does that work exactly in the co-op model?
We've been pretty hands off with that, and I kind of took that approach to let those people, we go and set the meter, put in the service, that kind of stuff for them to feed back into our system, but we've left that more to conservation and those power purchase or net metering agreements that they've set up. And I've kind of taken that hands-off approach so as to not create the illusion to BPA that we're trying to skirt their rules, because I really don't need to be involved in it. Those people are capitalism's taking the lead on that and taking care of it. So as far as I know, it's working fine. I haven't heard any complaints. So it must be working out for them. We do our piece. We size our equipment the way it needs to be sized and kind of stay out of it.
And then they subsequently are reimbursed for the power generated if it's not obviously distributed and used.
It's being assigned to certain accounts that are part of their co-op, and that's a UB function.
Okay.
The people that agree to invest in it or however they're doing it get their percentage assigned to their account. Understood. As an Ashland account holder.
Yeah, when we set that up as a virtual net meter agreement, we don't really care what the relationship is between whoever built the system and the people receiving the energy. All we need from them is the meter installation, and then they fill out a very simple piece of paperwork that says 10% goes to this account, 50% goes to that account, and I'm going to keep 40% for myself, or whatever combination. So that's the way it works well for utility billing, is just to take the monthly output and divide that up by whatever the formula is, and they just divvy it up to the customers who are supposed to receive it.
So the way I understand it, then if I was a member of the co-op, I would pay the co-op for my energy, or I pay into it. I don't want to get into the details of that, but I send money to the co-op, and then I get energy. I get my bill reduced at the city because of the energy that's getting put onto my account. Is that basically the deal?
That's one use case. It doesn't have to be a co-op though. It could just be, a family of 5 people that owns a big system and they want to split it. Or, if somebody wants to give it to their child, or an apartment building that wants to go in on a system together. So there's a lot of different use cases, and that's part of the hands-off, is we didn't want to say it has to be a co-op or it has to be this or that. As long as they pay for the meter and fill out the form correctly, that's all we need.
But the way that it works, I think, is that they for each system they put up, they have to go out and round up new subscribers to their system.
Actually,
right?
the very first user of that was one person that owned 2 houses, and they put it on their rental home that had better solar access than the home they lived in, and put all the credits to the home they lived in. So,
yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways to do it, but I think that in terms of scale, one of the best things that one of the more likely places is with the solar co-op, with the, the co-op folks, because I know that they're trying to get more, more larger scale installations going. So yeah. All right, so anything else for Tom? Any other questions or thoughts?
I had one more thing I wanted to add just on the resiliency piece. I have resumed, we got a new transmission account executive, so I kind of had to start over, but I've resumed the conversation around purchasing the Mountain Avenue substation, which will give us a lot more control. And there's room in there for another transformer, so we could pick up most of the load that we're now feeding out of that Pacific Power substation on Nevada Street, which reduces our costs for our transfer and also gives us more control in-house with owning the equipment and what equipment is in there and what we can do with it. And then gives us an entire substation as a backup.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
When we get there, that'll be a good piece to have.
Yeah, that does sound good. So, and that'll be all integrated, right, with the financial plan?
My goal is to have that transaction completed before the new contracts.
Yeah, that would make sense. Great. All right. Well, if there are no other questions, Tom, anything else you want to share with us before we let you have the rest of your day back?
No, thanks for your time. Thanks for having me in. You've got my email address. Anything comes up, let me know. I'll do my best to find you an answer.
All right.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks. We appreciate you coming out and all the good work that you are doing in thinking about these bigger issues for our electric system. I can tell you that not every climate group in the country has an electric department director like you, an electric utility director like you. So we appreciate you.
Thank you. Appreciate you guys.
All right. Take care. All right. So next up, we have the council annual report debrief, which
You want me to pull these slides up, Tanya?
it's Rick is going to give us I think the debrief. I don't know if we need to go through all the slides, but you can see what Rick brought to the council if you weren't able to watch the council meeting. Rick, what would you like to say about the debrief?
Not much. Almost everybody was at the meeting yesterday, and fourth time through, it's going to be like one sentence. So I think what I would prefer is that if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer. I do have one comment to make. At the end of the presentation, one of the counselors inquired about why we were not running our subcommittees, and there was the staff issue and all like that. So I think there might be some support on the council for us expanding our bandwidth. And so actually, Tanya, I'd like to flip it back to you and say, what can we do to get the council to enable us?
You know, a big part of where our issue sits is in staffing capacity for it. Because, you know, when we were doing our other subcommittees, we didn't have staff necessarily sitting in on our subcommittee meetings. They were open to the public, they were announced, but we didn't necessarily have all that coverage, and now we would have to do that. It is an issue. And right when we first started this COVID problem, we had an administrator and an assistant administrator. And then a month in, our administrator left and our assistant administrator became the interim administrator, and we never filled the rest of that. And so what's happened is everybody's been kind of, you know, pulled up in the administrative system, but we are missing a major full-time person in that system. And it's not going to get corrected and handled until we answer the manager question, which isn't going to happen until probably next March, maybe April. And that's where a big part of the problem is. It's just a capacity issue. And now we are layering on emergencies. So when we declared the emergency for the fire, it was simply a new bullet in our existing emergency declaration. And so that's why, and we have 22 commissions, something like that, we have a very large number of commissions that people are supporting. And so I think there are some structural things that the city can do that are sort of being discussed to free up some of that space, and certainly getting the manager question answered and then that other position refilled is a big part of it. But it's my understanding that it's an issue of the fact that it just takes more staffing to operate our subcommittees the way that we have to do them online. Stu, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I can only echo that. Elizabeth had a piece to say about that today, but she communicated it to me a little bit, which is that you know, other commissions are struggling with this as well. And they had a pretty lengthy discussion with the lawyers about what's going to fly and what's not going to fly. So basically, there's not capacity, especially after the fires, to do any kind of subcommittee official meetings. And I think that's very frustrating for me as well as for you folks, because I've been waiting for a couple of years to see progress with you all and to get this group together. However, we need to be really careful to not breach the public meeting laws, because if we end up bringing something to council, say in a year from now, and there's any sort of question about whether there was an illegal meeting or, you know, whether it's in good faith or not, people who don't want policy change could use that to reset the whole process. And it's happened before, I'm told. I don't have a good example of it, but just to say we want to be really careful of that boundary. And it's especially with Elizabeth, who does so much in admin, getting sort of promoted in the midst of these emergencies to more important issues. It's basically just me, and it might be just me at some future meetings as well. So yeah, basically what Tanya said is that we're not going to be able to spare any staff capacity for more stuff until after the emergency is cleared.
Okay, so the other part of it is when we can next get in front of council. What should we be thinking for bringing policies to council?
Oh, that's for me, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, I have a puzzled look on my face because I am increasingly hearing from council members during different conversations that they because there's going to be so much turnover on the council, that there is some period of time where they don't feel like this council should make major decisions. Now, whether what we're bringing in front of them constitutes a major decision or not is, I think, part of the question. If it doesn't, then I think you know, the November, December timeframe could work fine. If what we're asking them for is direction and you know, sort of that initial, this is what we're thinking of, you know, or even coming back and saying and answering that doing the conversation around how they want to engage with us. But they may not. They may even just say, well, you should ask, you know, you've got a new council coming, and so you should ask them how they want to engage with you. So, you know, I don't know exactly when would be best, but I do know we have quite a few things still on our plate, and the fire has just added more of them. Stu?
I just want to jump in because I personally, you know, we have the SEEP, it's adopted and blessed by council. That gives us permission to go ahead and take anything in there and bake it to 80%, and then take that back to council. So I would say as soon as we can get something 80% baked, let's take it. But I think we need to have an idea about specifically what that's going to be. And I would also advocate that this group try to separate projects as much as possible and not arrive with an omnibus climate package at a council meeting, because that's going to make decision-making more difficult. But if we can say, take something, for example, the on-bill financing, and put together a reasonable you know, example of what that policy is going to look like and how it would work in Ashland, I think then we take that to the next level and say, hey, we've got this here. We need action and funding now. That's my interpretation.
And we did go through and we refined our list, right? We took it down to 5 or 6 things. And I think that as a package could go at any time. we know we're going to have a budget adjustment because of the clean fuels. You know, that's going to be something that we I think are going to want to have a a strong recommendation to council around. So I see the potential of both of those things, being done in the next couple of months. If we want to finish out the conversation of how does council want to interact with us, I think that's for the new council in January or February. But the schedule is going to be packed within the new year, absolutely jammed. Yeah, Ray.
Getting back to the subcommittees, is there anything wrong with one-on-one conversations?
No, you can connect. So it gets fuzzy real quick. The governor modified the public meetings laws because of COVID to make Zoom kind of more acceptable. But that's only because of the COVID emergency. So I think we need to be super careful that, the word I got from the lawyers was, let's not even use the word subcommittee, because that's going to lead people to believe that there's something happening, even if there's not. And we definitely don't want that. We don't want to fight that image.
Well, what I was thinking of, some of our action items get assigned to one person or maybe two, not a subcommittee. So you can still work on those together with somebody else, and then you can bring those to the CPC.
Right.
Yes.
I think that does work. I have a thing for a later agenda item to talk about the blog and stuff like that, so I'll wait on that until we get there. But yeah, I think having one person in charge of a project is fine. The thing we need to avoid the group emails and the perception that any kind of secret decision making is happening, especially when we get into the electrification programs, because we will have to be, I don't know the extent of the legal gray area, but it may not be legal to say like electrification because that's a fuel preference. A lot of times I couch our programs in climate action instead, because that's not regulated by the PUC. Now, Ashland Electric doesn't have all the same rules as Pacific Power and PGE, but typically the guidance that the PUC gives trickles down to all the consumer-owned utilities. So it's best to just be careful about presentation, I guess.
Okay. Well, the PUC also has to start complying with and looking at the executive order from Cape Brown. So they may change some of their past practices.
Yeah, hopefully.
Okay. So, yep.
So still on the subcommittee thing. So you, implicitly, it sounds like you believe we cannot use Google Docs to actually do joint work together. Even though whatever comes out of Google Docs, whatever comes out of that joint working, doesn't have any standing unless it comes to this commission, which is a public meeting. So nothing would actually get approved, nothing could be approved by a small group of people working on something unless it actually came to the full meeting. There's not a quorum, there's not any power. It seems to me we're dancing a little bit on a head of a pin about public meetings and being a little bit restrictive, but I get that. There we want to be most conservative. On the Zoom issue, and the staffing, it sounds to me like we didn't have staff involved in the subcommittee meetings before. We only have to have staff involved in the subcommittees now because it would be on Zoom. Is there a way that one of us could play the role of the host and the note taker? We could certainly, the subcommittee meetings were already open. They were already open to the public. We can continue to have them open to the public.
I think the answer is going to be no. I follow in theory, especially with the Google Docs stuff, like, yeah, you can't bring it back. But I can only tell you what the lawyer passed on to Elizabeth for me to deliver here. And that was, well, I may as well skip ahead since we're talking about it. The Wildfire Commission has had a question about, can they publicly post a project document or something like that? They were ultimately told no about a blog or some similar item, but they did come to a compromise with the lawyers about having something. And here's what that, I can tell you briefly what that looks like, but I don't have the full explanation in front of me. But basically that you could have a project coordinator who is not involved in editing or decision making, but is more of a collator of information, and that person could collate information from the rest of the commission and put it in a public facing document. But there's the restriction there, I guess, is that it's not a group edit. It's a compilation of things that then gets digested more at the meeting. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, actually, that would help a tremendous amount to even have that available. So if it's hard to do these things if there's no written guidance. What I'm hearing is this is all oral. Is that right?
Well, no. People can email, like, say you were the keeper of.
No, I mean from the lawyer.
Oh, so far, yes, but they're pretty scrambled over there. We were hoping to have Elizabeth today, but with the reschedule and everything, we just don't. So we can request written guidance, I suppose. But I think the answer is still going to be no.
Well, no, even what the compromise was with the fire folks.
Yes, we can. I think we can get
having
written.
that roll out across more than just that one commission in a consistent fashion doesn't seem like it ought to be a whole lot of work.
Yeah, we can find out if there's written guidance for that. I just found out about that today, so we can take it back and see what they've written down, if anything. And if not, maybe we can get a written recommendation from the lawyers.
That would be great.
I mean, and this, it's pretty frustrating to me that we don't have the subcommittees, because here we are all ready to go, and it's just one more barrier. But I also want to recognize that we have to stick with the process, as the governor and the lawyers say.
So here I think go ahead, Gary.
So what was once the Built Environment Subcommittee basically distributed or assigned or volunteered, I guess is the correct word. Each member volunteered to take the lead on the 11 projects that we have on our agenda, basically dating back to March. And so the expectation is that those leads on each of those projects will collaborate, as Stu was alluding to, with other members of what had been the subcommittee. And that person, the lead, will ultimately, when he concludes that, and I am using the correct pronoun here because we don't have any women on what was the subcommittee, they'll bring that back to the full CPC for review and action. So we've got 11 projects basically that we're working on and attempting to move forward, 2 of which were largely complete back in March. So my expectation is that those 2 will be coming to the full CPC in a reasonable time frame.
Yeah, so when it actually kind of dovetails in with what is one of the next items on our list here, which is this question about focused area definitions. We have it's part of the packet, but essentially where we're at is that at each meeting, we're going to check in on these focus areas, right? They're not subcommittees, they're focus areas now. We're going to check in on utilities, built environment, and administration and planning. And within each one of these, I think this is what you're saying, Gary, within each one of these, there are projects and there are leads on that project, and that lead person is going to be keeping the larger commission up to date. How that lead person gathers their information is, I think, from what I've read from the attorney, entirely up to them, as long as they do not speak with a quorum of this commission, one-on-one, right? Because one-on-one, if you get to the quorum number, you've had a serial meeting. But if you are talking to 2 people, and talking to other people in the community, whoever you want to talk with, to formulate your thinking so that when this group gets to that point in the next agenda, you have something coherent to say about it is not part of the public meeting laws, right? That's the way I understand it. But to the extent that you're talking to other people, one of the things that you know, is that kind of weird space is, you know, what does it look like if 3 of you are sitting down at a coffee shop somewhere, right? You're not a quorum.
Doesn't work.
You're not, but you're not anything. You're not a subcommittee. You're not a quorum. We've gotten rid of the subcommittees. You should be able to talk to each other, and whoever's the lead comes back with that information. What you can't do, and what came up in the Wildfire Safety Commission, is we had a document and we put it up as a shared document. And actually it was a list. That's all it was. It was a list, and we said, check the list and add anything to it that you think should be added to it. But what they determined was that, you know, one person saying something and then reading what somebody else said and saying something else constituted a discussion. And a group discussion can't be had outside of the public view. And so that's why you get that kind of, you know, what is the different sort of feedback or pieces. So I think, you know, I believe that this is in line with the attorneys. We're not going to get FaceTime with the attorney anytime soon, because emergency situations like this have a million legal issues associated with them. But you know, if as we get to these other elements, if you're the person in charge of that, you have quite a bit of leeway in terms of who you talk to. You just can't get to the point where you've talked to a quorum of people
At the same time.
at all. If you do it one at a time and you get to the quorum, it's called a serial meeting, and you can't do that.
Ah, okay.
But in the case of the focus area group of the built environment, the 4 of us can in fact collaborate by one-on-one communication and ultimately come to not an agreement, but having the lead person formulate the strategy for those 4 people and present that to the CPC. Not that it's a unanimous agreement, not that there's any implicit concurrence among the other 3 people, but it is the lead's perspective on what is how to move forward with this particular area.
Yeah, with this particular top item.
Right.
And so each focus group will have multiple items. And
I
each
thought
item is
you
assigned to somebody
discussed a
else.
serial meeting, Gary. You said talking with the other 4 people.
Well, actually, there's only 3, so there's a total of 4, which is less than the quorum for the CPC. And that's the magic threshold. Is that, at least that's
Yes.
my understanding.
Yes, stay under the quorum if you're assigned a particular topic, stay under the quorum in terms of who you talk to about it. And then you decide what, you know, you're getting input from a variety of people, but not a quorum. And then you're going to decide what to bring forward for discussion on your item.
And the nice thing, actually, what we didn't enjoy before, but now apparently do, is that we can contact people outside of the interest group and outside the CPC to get input. So we actually have a lot more latitude in terms of trying to formulate a community-wide thought or approach, which I think is a valuable addition to what we had before.
So just to be clear, Stu is not part of the quorum, right?
Nope. Nope, it's just commissioners.
Just for the sake of keeping everything clear to the folks who don't participate directly in this group, I request that we not even use the word subcommittee, and preferably not the word group or subgroup, because really it's just a project lead and whatever information gathering you do.
Yeah.
And let's just not imply that there's any other group, because I don't want to confuse stakeholders who aren't at the table.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, the
thank you.
focus areas are simply so we can organize our agendas. And inside each focus area will be multiple things that different people are reporting back on. So if that looks good, I think we can actually dive into our focus groups or the focus areas, not groups, our focus area progress. And so let's start with utilities. And Jeff, I believe you've put together a short presentation. So Stu, can we bring that up?
Yeah. Also,
Can I just break in just a second, because I have a point of maybe a point of order or something.
Sure.
So my understanding of what we were calling electrifying Ashland is that it's not strictly the built environment group. And the way your memo from early August characterized it is that was one of the focuses of the whole CPC, that along with plans. And the way I wrote that document, it is not, it goes way beyond tasks that the built environment can take. I think it's actually, I think we need to have a conversation about assigning leads for some of the top tasks that are utilities focus area specific when that comes. So I just want to make sure that we don't get through this meeting in the next 45 minutes and not having an opportunity to talk about what I understood was going to be one of the top priorities of this commission, which is electrifying Ashland, and not get our assignments, clear.
Yes,
So that
if we can get to it.
Yeah, so that's
Yeah,
why
well,
I wonder whether we should do that before diving into one of the, the reports from the focus areas. I think it actually, my point of order is it should be done now, and then we decide what goes into the focus areas, or we defer it to next month if that's what you want to do.
Yeah, well, can I break in here for a second? So I feel like we have skipped over 6.3, which is the memo that I wrote for this packet. And I think that's what Bob is talking about.
Yeah, and that's my point. You put in 6.3, in your focus area definition, you assigned electrification to built environment. I don't think it belongs to that. There's a whole lot of things to do with electrification that are generation and which are utilities. Yes, and so now that we're finally all meeting together, I would like to comment on the memo that you and Stu wrote. It went far beyond what I had thought was your action item, and I'm fine with that because it's a really great outline, but I believe it needs to be broken up across the focus areas. But before we even get to that, I want to be sure that we're all in agreement on that definition document.
should we go there then next?
That's what I would like.
I think it's next on the agenda, so.
Well,
go ahead, Tanya.
We have these three focus groups. The question is what goes inside of them. And we have also identified three, we can either organize it, these focus areas can either be utilities, built environment, administration, planning, or they can be electrify Ashland, planning, and what would be and sort of SEEP update, right? I mean, we could go either way with it. I don't think it really matters because we no longer get to meet at the focus area space. I think the more important piece is that we're identifying actual issues and topics that are going to be researched and brought back. So I think it's fine if we want to do this. We could spend the rest of the meeting talking about this memo, and I don't want to do that. So so let's go ahead and dive in. But I think the question is, which way are we going to organize this work now that our subcommittees have been blown up? Are we going to keep with the original wording, or are we going to keep with the frame of these refined high order goals? So
I personally like the higher order goals, electrify Ashland and so on. It seems like it brings a little more specificity to what we're trying to do.
Rick, what do you think? You put the memo together, and it holds with that older with our original subcommittee focus points. How does that line up for you?
Well, I'd like to not have the discussion of redistributing the responsibilities. You know, we're dealing with an unfortunate situation. The focus areas, I believe, align with what we spent an awful lot of time straightening out last fall, and I'd like not to revisit that discussion.
Do you think it's pretty easy to distribute the Electrify Ashland, all these pieces across those three subgroups?
I think it's actually quite straightforward. And one of the outcomes I was hoping for from this meeting was to anoint Stu and I to take the memo that he and Bob created and partition them, which is what I thought that Bob was alluding to.
Okay.
It's actually extremely easy to do because I highlighted the items that I think were that I suggested in response to your request that were most near term. And basically anything that's generation is utilities, and anything that's consumption is built environment. So it's very simple to distribute. What I want to make sure is that if that's going to be our framework, that's our framework, and that we don't then start to distribute it into a whole bunch of different things and then not have the focus that we want, which is electrifying Ashland and planning.
So does anyone want to make a different run at this? Because what I'm hearing is that we keep those two major focus points, and then we keep the three existing focus areas, and then we redistribute. Does that meet your needs, Bob, for making sure that we talk about the right things at the right time today? Because we're going to be out of time soon.
Sure.
Okay. Rick, does that meet what you need in terms of your memo? What kind of clarification do we need on the outline in your memo?
Well, I wrote it independently. I'm looking for the commission to either confirm or modify it.
Okay, so let's pull that up. The focus areas definition. It seems that if everybody's got that up and looking, it seems that the one question that's still sitting here is that the Electrify Ashland, there will be Electrify Ashland tasks under utilities and under built environment that maybe are not there at this moment. Does that seem right? Would that be the adjustment we would make?
I think Bob already suggested it'd be quite easy to partition it right now.
Yes, in those two ways, right? With Electrify tasks for you that are specific to utilities for power generation under utilities, and the other ones under built environment. Is that correct?
Are you asking Rick or are you asking me?
Both of you. Whichever one of you wants to answer it.
So I think that there are items under generation that are not obvious under the bullet that's utilities, such as storage, which I think is something that is going to be critical. It's a complicated, messy topic, but it's going to be critical for really making much progress very fast. I think that there's even the putting solar, I think the whole question of utility rates, which is not generation, but I think needs to be affordable utility rates so that we're not doing something with electrifying that's actually going to price out our low-income consumers. There's already a lot of stress on that, and I think that has to be at attention to that. That's not on there anywhere. And I think well, there's this item about restricting new gas hookups, which is also not in the generation by source, and I don't think it's in the in Rick's bullet.
Well, no, of course not. Every single thing is not in there. Otherwise, it would have to be this enormous outline, and I can't predict the future. So I don't think that's really a fair way of criticizing the thing.
No, I wasn't criticizing. I didn't mean to criticize. I was just.
I think the only problem would come if somebody disagrees, it should be in one versus the other. So exactly. Why don't we just assign them and see how it works?
Right. I think all the things, Bob, you just listed belong to utilities.
Okay.
You know, maybe one way to think about this, how we think about it in the utility, is there's stuff that's behind the customer's meter, and there's stuff that's in front of the customer's meter. And that's basically these two categories. And then there's planning, which is everything. I don't know if that helps.
Well, that unfortunately, given the new sophistication of our electrical system, it doesn't partition all that cleanly.
No, not completely.
Of where the meter is, because the batteries frequently are behind the meters these days, but there's also front of the meter batteries.
Right.
What I think is that that particular item belongs with utilities, because the technical expertise and the regulatory environment that guides all that is largely a utilities associated thing. It's not having to do with land use planning.
So what strikes me is that we have some information here. So we sent out, we asked Rick to put together the focus areas. And then we also asked Bob to work on the outline for electrifying Ashland. And there's a conversation now that has to happen between how the Electrify Ashland activities fold out across those three focus areas. I don't know that that's what we want to spend the rest of our time on today, but I'm wondering if Bob and Rick, if you all would revisit that together between now and the next meeting and identify which of the electrifying Ashland pieces go into the built environment, which ones go into utilities. Because we have identified certain things. We gave people tasks to come back with this week that they're set to report on or lead a discussion on. So we can still do those because those are going to stay where they are. And we can even do an overview of the Electrify Ashland piece today without knowing exactly where those tasks fit. And then when you come back, we would be able to slot them in more specifically. Would that work? That works for Rick. Will that work for you, Bob?
Yeah.
Perfect.
I
Okay.
already got it down as an action item.
Okay,
We're going to be
good,
meeting
Ray.
again quite soon because of this is a reschedule. So
Right. We only got about 10 days to get it to Elizabeth.
Yeah, so we'll be in a little bit of a sprint. Okay, so let's go ahead and move over to Jeff. Jeff is helping us track the Executive Order 2004. And so I know he's got a short presentation. I believe, Jeff, you're going to be updating us on all three of these elements, the Oregon Building Code Division, Progress, Oregon Department of Energy, and Public Utilities Commission. Is that correct?
Yes, so it's going to be a little bit of a whirlwind tour, fairly high level. If you look at these three entities, the Building Codes Division, Public Utilities, and the Department of Energy, they're all quite different. If you want detail, boy, the building codes is the place to go to it. They've been working on this stuff for many, many years, and you can drill down to what do you need to know about water heaters specifically. The other two entities are more bureaucratic, more amorphous, and less detail about exactly how they're going to implement the executive orders. So I'm going to run through these slides fairly quickly. I'm not going to read everything. You can look at it at your leisure, but to put it into context, this recent executive order is one of several that affect these agencies. So the Building Codes Division, they're really working on a 2017 executive order that focused on the built environment, and it's about energy use and efficiency. And then the latest executive order on climate change kind of updates that and mandates some specific targets as well as reporting requirements. Next slide. So I'm going to kind of what's recent activity, current activity, and what's the future for Building Codes Division. It's pretty easy to, after you go through 100 pages or so web pages, you can kind of figure this out. I did talk to Stu about some of this stuff, as well as Tom McDowell in the city's building department. So Tom in particular was pretty helpful to put this into context. So in 2019, the BCD adopted what's called zero energy ready requirements for commercial buildings. And on the bottom there's 9 different elements of what a zero energy ready home or a commercial building would do. And you can kind of see those step 1, 2, and 3. So the, for example, the Public Utilities Commission right now is doing a lot of work on lighting and so on. But you can kind of see that that some of the things that touch on us would be, you know, energy efficiency appliances, and then on the other extreme, solar ready. The other very important thing that was done in 2019 was wildfire hazard mitigation provisions. They really pulled this forward. It wasn't really due until 2021, and that addressed roofing, exterior walls and fixtures, overhangs, things like that, in addition to ventilation. Next slide. So current activity, that older executive order had a directive on installation of solar panels and related technologies, and that was delayed to some degree by COVID, but they're in the process of implementing that code update right now. And the big part of that is new construction on residential buildings has to include a 300 square foot solar ready zone, in addition to wiring raceways and electrical circuit breaker panel requirements. So that's pretty significant in terms of what the state is doing now. Next slide. So there should only be two on here. That EO 20-04 was an artifact. So upcoming, they're working on electrical vehicle readiness standards on new construction. So again, that's going to be electrical panel. That's really undefined at this point. They haven't yet figured out whether or not they're going to include things like battery power walls and things like that. And then implementation of zero energy ready standards for residential structures. So that's coming, and that is likely to be what they call a REACH code in 2021. So that probably won't be fully in place for another 2 to 5 years, but that will probably be what the so-called REACH code is. Next slide. So these were some of the changes that were approved in August of this year for the residential specialty code. I'm not going to read through all these, but all of these things are going to improve energy efficiency. I would call your attention to the last one. That's the only provision that has anything to do with water heaters in the new code. Next slide. And since there was some interest in water heaters, I took a little closer look on that. In addition to that insulation requirement on the first run of piping, there is no preference at all for gas versus electric. So that is, you know, perhaps an opportunity if we were going to be talking to BCD or offering comments. And likewise, the Energy Trust of Oregon, their programs offer discounts on both gas and electric water heaters. And I think our preference would probably be that they only offer discounts on electric water heaters. So that's an opportunity I think we could look at further. Next slide. So the PUC, the requirements were for wildfire risk mitigation, incorporating greenhouse gas goals in their deliberations, and then utility investment in EV infrastructure. So the first of these can be pretty well defined. Incorporating goals in deliberations is a really amorphous thing that is hard to pin down. And then the utilities have been investing in some EV infrastructure to this point, but there's no definitive requirements to, for example, expand that infrastructure. Next slide. So this is the wildfire provisions. The PUC has initiated a rulemaking. I think that's is fairly significant, but that is a process that's going to take at least a year, and they're presently gathering stakeholder input, and then PUC staff will then draft a new or revised set of rules. Next. And the outcome so far from the executive order is the formation of something called this Wildfire and Electric Cooperative. So this is a consortium of utilities, electric companies, and operators that are supposed to get together and share best practices. And there is a workshop. I think this is their second workshop is coming up in a couple weeks. So again, this is all brand new and not very well defined at this point in time. Next. In terms of transportation electrification, both Pacific Core and PGE, I have trouble with that because there's Pacific Gas and Electric down in California. But Portland Gas and Electric and Pacific Core have had these charging pilots in place for the last couple of years. My question when I looked through here was kind of why isn't Ashland on anyone's list? And I don't know the answer to that. I haven't talked to anyone, but that's again something that we could follow up, and it may be because we have our own utility. So neither Pacific Core or PGE is involved with Ashland.
Yeah.
Next slide. And by the way, that was pretty much the only real evidence that I could find of EV infrastructure being pursued by the PUC at this point. I thought I would just, if you want to read an interesting document, the stakeholder comments in relation to this executive order, there's like 3 or 4 pages of those. And I just pulled out a couple representative that you can see. So this is the kind of input that PUC is collecting in their rulemaking process. And so fuel switching, decarbonization, modify the Energy Trust of Oregon programs to better increase or better reduce greenhouse gases, and then concern about how the changes that people like us are looking at are going to impact low-income customers. Next slide. So the Oregon Department of Energy, in the context of this executive order, I would call them a kind of a helper agency. They are getting matched up with Oregon, the Department of Transportation, all these other agencies to help them so that it's a little different to pin down exactly what they're doing beyond this second bulletin where they are issuing new guidelines for on energy efficiency for these devices and equipment in commercial and residential structures. So this is a rulemaking by the Department of Energy, and this will have to be ratified by the legislature and enacted next year. It's nothing that's too far different from states like California and even the U.S. Department of Energy are doing. So it is what it is. There doesn't seem to be any fantastic new initiatives as a result of the executive order. Next slide. And again, the DOE is partnering with different agencies, and this is one of the things they're working with Building Codes Division to develop models and reporting requirements, performance expectations on their code cycles. So this is just an example, and they're doing things like this with multiple agencies. But at this point in time, a real lack of specificity. Next. Same thing on transportation. They're participating, but they're not the lead agency. And the second bullet there is typical of a lot of the jargon that you will read when you look at the first round of agency reports on their compliance with the executive order. Next slide. I think that's it.
All right. So, Jeff, thank you for putting that together for us. It's hard to keep track of what all is happening at the state from these executive orders. It seems that we are looking at some code changes coming down to us from the state that may very well handle some of the things that we had been talking about doing on our own. So it seems that continuing to track this and kind of setting aside our own local work, which is what we've done on that, is the best way forward. So you're going to continue to keep track of those for us. Is that correct? Is that something that you're willing to do?
Well, I would be happy to, but I look, I'm the newbie here, so I look for guidance from you guys. Where would you like me to put my time and effort?
I think that would be great because we're counting on these changes coming from the state government. And so, that's why we're not necessarily trying to push them as individual ordinances here. But if it looks like the governor's executive order is losing steam, or is, there's extensive delays or something like that, it would be good for us to know that so we could assess whether or not we want to, bring that back onto our plates at some future time. Does that sound right, Stu?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some things happening at the state level that we don't want to replicate here. And even if we did, I doubt we would get them done faster.
Yeah.
But that said, there's a lot of things happening, particularly with Building Codes Department, that, it's not clear how much they are going to willingly shift the furniture around. There's a lot of advocacy from the buildings and the trades to keep the status quo. And there's a lot of advocacy from folks like ourselves and from the governor's office to make more aggressive change. So right now, BCD is actually hiring its new director. So I think kind of like with our council and mayor, they have to comply with the executive order in the meantime, but they're gonna have potentially different direction or potentially more of the same. So we don't know yet.
Is there any way to influence that, Stu?
Not directly. I know we do some advocacy through the Zero Group, and I also participate with a group of cities that's sort of advocating for a step code, which would be using the REACH code as the next cycle model code, which is a popular approach in British Columbia, California, and has been pretty successful. So, there may be occasions when we could submit something from the mayor or from council to the state in way of comments, and there may be some lesser commenting ability that this commission could weigh in on directly. But for the most part, it's in sort of state process right now. I forget, Jeff, what the next deadline was, October, for reporting back. They had a September 15th report. All the agencies did. And then there's another window coming up pretty soon for the next report.
Yes, and there seems to be a lag time on those reports in terms of them being made public.
Okay. So, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to say, there's a little bit of lag. You can often participate by watching the live sessions, which are usually like 4 or 5 hours long. You can subscribe to get updates directly from Oregon Department of Energy or whichever agency, if you can tell it which work group you want to follow. And they have work groups for every different topic. It's easy to get 30 emails from them about that. And then the only other thing I wanted to say is that we're at 15 minutes. So
yeah, yes, I'm aware of that. So I think if it sounds right to everyone else, Jeff, if you can keep tracking that progress of that state level action, and with an eye towards anything that this commission or the council or the mayor might be able to do to help keep it on track and keep it moving forward, and bring it to our attention when you think that there's something that is either exciting that's developing or something that we can take action on. I think that would make me feel like that body of work is in hand. Is that any disagreements with that?
No, I don't disagree with that. I might suggest that we also task Jeff with keeping us informed on when things are likely to change that will affect how building is done in Ashland.
Yeah, that's a great addition. Perfect.
Okay. Yeah, as I kind of get more familiar with the work of the commission, I'll be more focused in terms of what I'm looking for and what I bring back.
Great. Great. So as I look at the rest of the agenda, we've already discussed the comprehensive plan elements update during the staff update. We had some conversation of the master plan process, but I think that's going to have to hold off, Ray, until the next meeting. Yeah, go ahead.
I have one comment on that. The TAP plan is supposed to go to City Council October 4th, I think, or something.
Okay.
So I talked with Scott and I'm waiting for a final draft to be posted so we can review that. So I'm hoping to get some input to him before that happens. If not, I think there's some time between the presentation and when it gets approved. So at one point we'll catch up with it and make sure it has what we want.
Okay, and great. And can Ray, when that happens, when you have your assessment of that and you send those comments in, can you please CC me on that so that I know what I'm looking for in the final?
Yeah. Scott supposedly is already ahead. He's included some stuff knowing what we want.
Yeah.
It's just really double checking it.
Yeah. Your assessment last time with the water plan was really helpful for me coming into the council meeting. I suggest that we hold off on any discussion of the SOCAN survey report, and Julian's not here for his element anyway. We should, I think, move to the election of chair and vice chair since that's a sort of a mandated time space, and then come back and wrap up with whatever pieces we might be able to pull from there. So we'll see if we can sneak any of our agenda items back on. But I think we'll lead next time with a major conversation around the Electrify Ashland piece that will build off of Rick and Bob's conversation about kind of where the various pieces should be. So the floor is open for us to elect a chair and vice chair. So I think we just take nominations from the floor unless someone, and of course you're welcome to nominate yourself. Gary?
I would nominate Julian Bell for chair. He's served as chair of what was the Built Environment Subcommittee and facilitated our formulation of several products that were delivered to the full CPC. I think additionally, the fact that he's a candidate for the city council, having him elected as the CPC chair would possibly help him in his candidacy. And I think the principal focus of our work is to get things through the council so that they actually get adopted. So consequently, if we can help to influence the composition of the council with members who are sensitive and supportive to climate change issues, it will serve the committee as a whole in good stead.
So Stu, with this, I just have a procedural question. Do we need a second as well, right, for a nomination? Yes. Okay. So the floor is open.
Can we have a counter nomination? Can we have multiple nominations at the same time? Or do we need to finish one at a time?
We can have multiple at the same time, I understand, but we need to have a second in order for that person to stand for that office.
Gary, for a second, have you already spoken with Julian? Because he's not here, so.
I have spoken to Julian.
Okay.
Did you say you had or you have not?
I have.
Okay.
In the affirmative.
Okay. Mine glitched out a little bit there. So is there a second?
Well, is it permissible to ask whether or not there are any other people that are interested?
Well, we will after. So if the person doesn't get a second, then they don't end up in the conversation. We won't ask the question about them. We need to see who all has a nomination and a second. So the question on the table is Julian's nomination, not whether or not we're voting on Julian. It's do we want Julian in the pile? We need a second in order for that to be a consideration.
Yeah, I'll second him.
Okay, so Julian is one of the options for chair. Now the floor is open again for any additional nominations.
Do we get discussion first from Gary and Ray and then everyone else, or do we just,
no, I think, well, I think what we need to do is see who the options are and then have a discussion. Who has been nominated and seconded, so we know who the pool is. So are there any other nominations for chair? Bob?
Yeah, I'd nominate Rick for chair. Do I need to speak to that now, or do I speak to that later?
You'll speak to it later, or actually go ahead and speak to it now because Gary spoke to the other one. We're sort of feeling our way through.
Okay. I think the fact that Rick was involved in everything from the outset and has been the vice chair and has really worked on trying to organize our agenda in an organized manner was really a useful skill and a useful role for moving us forward from this stage.
I would second the nomination.
Okay, so we have Rick and Julian in the mix. Are there any other nominations? Okay, Rick, would you stand for election? I guess we should ask you before we launch down this path.
I will do whatever the commission asks of me, including being the chair.
Okay. So if anybody would like to speak to in terms of either one of these nominations, the floor is open for that. Stu, the best way to do this, I know we had it set up for the council, was to do something, I think, in the chat box. Is that correct?
I'm not sure about the chat box. I was told we shouldn't use the chat box for anything, but if we read the names out as they come in, that probably works. Or you could just do roll call vote also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is the first time that that I've been in a situation where we've had two options on a commission, and so I want to make sure that we do it in a good way, and to do one in a correct way. So maybe it's simply a roll call vote would be the most appropriate space. Would that make sense, Jeff?
I was wondering if I could ask the question. One of my concerns is who has the time, the bandwidth to do it. I think Rick has demonstrated that he has the time and the bandwidth. I just don't know about Julian. I do note that he's not always at every meeting, and I know he's got professional responsibility. So my concern with Julian would be, is he, does he have the bandwidth to do what needs to be done? I just don't know the answer to that question.
Well, and I think that's the purpose of this discussion, is to offer up thoughts like that and questions. We may not answer them as a commission, but I think that's the purpose of this moment in this process. Is there anything that people would want to speak to? Anything else like what Jeff was just saying before we do a roll call vote? Okay, so the options for the roll call vote are Rick Barth and Julian Bell. And so let's go ahead. There's no particular order, right, Stu? Shall I just go in the order I see people on my screen? Okay, and I'm required to vote, right? I typically let the group do that, but I think I understand that I'm required to vote.
I don't know the answer to that.
Well, they told me that I was earlier.
I think that's true, but I'm just not the expert, but I think you're right.
Okay. All right, so let's start with Ray.
Rick.
Bob.
Rick.
Gary.
Julian.
Rick.
Rick.
Chris.
Rick.
Jeff.
Rick.
And I vote for Rick. So that gives us a chair. Congratulations, Rick.
Thanks, guys.
We also then, of course, need a vice chair. And we have 4 minutes left. So maybe I think what we should do is take that up at the next meeting. Rick, are you comfortable bringing, moving forward with this next meeting without a formal vice chair in place?
Yeah, I have no expectation of not being there. So
Okay.
I think that's fine.
Okay, very good. All right, so
I just wanted to comment on the voting. Gary, I respect you submitting Julian's name, but I think I shared some of the same concerns that Jeff had, especially since he has other aspirations as well.
Granted.
I feel the same way. Thanks for saying that.
So the things that we didn't get to today are that bigger discussion of the electrifying Ashland piece, which we mentioned we'll look at in relation to the work that Bob and Rick are going to do between now and then. And then Julian, we hope will be able to join us for the PV Ready requirements update. The SOCAN survey should go back on the agenda, as should the SEEP update. In terms of our agenda and packet deadline, Stu, what does that look like, given that we have a 3-week time period between now and our next meeting?
Ideally, so Elizabeth likes to send the packet out 1 week ahead, so that would be Thursday for us. She would like to have things the Tuesday prior, so that she has Wednesday to put it all together, which I think is a very reasonable request from her part.
And so what date does that become for us in this calendar?
That's a good question. Let me look.
Maybe the 29th? I don't know.
So we meet October 8th. So she would need, the 29th.
Okay, so we have 11 days. And then we'll find out soon if Avista is going to come and talk with us in October. Is that correct, Stu?
Yeah, we'll check on that.
Great. So I think we've got the bones of our next conversation, which also includes this element, this agenda item of the shared online documents and other subcommittee alternatives. I think we'll take that up again if Elizabeth has anything more to suggest to us, or if we have any more clarifying questions, maybe we can ask Elizabeth when she comes in.
Okay.
All right. So I think that takes us, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, in the past, we had talked about perhaps reviewing the action items briefly at the end of the meeting. Do you want to do that real quick? If Ray has an easy list.
Okay.
Yes.
The first one was Adam setting up the meeting with Avista, see if that's going to happen or not. There was one discussion on electrification dollars for transportation. I'm not quite sure where those are going to go or where they can be used. So Stu, I'll send these to you and you can let me know if
Okay.
Okay. The third one was Stu just checking on the water heater dollar conversions and add to the master plan the water management conservation. There's scheduling a future meeting with APRC pool group. And regarding Tom's discussion, I had a couple things in terms of future demand. What would that look like? And when is the master plan update engagement needed? Tom mentioned ONS. I'm not sure what ONS was.
They're the engineers that we consult with.
Oh, okay. And then 6 was Rick, Stu, and Bob in terms of assigning the Electrify Ashland actions to the group. And the last one would just have Elizabeth be ready to clarify anything on the subcommittee meetings.
Okay. Well, so yeah, Ray, if you can send those to me and Elizabeth, we'll clean them up and send them back out.
Okay.
And the minutes will come after that.
Okay, great. So just as we prepare to get out of the meeting, it's been a huge week in our community of Southern Oregon, and as this committee is sort of getting its traction again, I just want to thank everyone for the good work that you're doing. It's frustrating to not be able to use our standard structures and to still try to get the work done around the reality of what we're dealing with. And I just so appreciate that this commission works so well and keeps working so hard to do what we need to do in the short and the long term. So thank you very much. I hope you have a great rest of your evening and weekend. And then we will see everyone October 8th. And I officially hand the gavel to Rick.
And I officially commend you for your work this past year. Very good, Tanya.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.